Welcome back, everyone. We are returning Rise of Augustus. This is part 4 of our little series. We have Cassius and Brutus over here in Anatolia. What are they doing? You know what they're doing. They're revolting. And of course, as we keep catch up, I believe the Syrian governor that was ally to the cause, the Triumvirate, was killed. Macedonia has a bunch of legions in it now, and Cassius and Brutus are on the run. Obviously, we also have the Second Triumvirate already formed. They have their provinces accordingly. Gaul is Antony, Hispania / Iberia goes, of course, to you know what I'm talking about, and of course Augustus in Africa. Let's keep going.
And paid heavy tributes to him. In a few months, Brutus and Cassius between them had thus neutered two powerful naval allies of the Triumvirs.
Right, Xanthus and Rhodes.
As well as massively increasing their finances, ensuring that they would be able to keep their legions loyal when the time came to confront the Triumvirs in Greece. Cassius and Brutus, hearing that Cleopatra was also sending a fleet
Lepidus is who I was thinking of.
to the Peloponnese, sent 80 ships of their fleet under Mercus to keep an eye out for her arrival. Fortunately for the Liberators though, a storm had devastated Cleopatra's fleet, forcing her to return to Egypt.
Damn.
Not wanting to keep such a large fleet idle, Mercus instead sailed to Brundisium to blockade the port and prevent the Triumvirs from sending more men across the Adriatic. Antony, in command of the forces in the area, attempted to break the blockade with his own ships, but did not have the numbers, and was forced to send for Octavian to assist him. Octavian was currently engaged in a campaign against Sextus Pompey. The son of Pompey the Great had taken advantage of the chaos caused by the assassination of Caesar, its aftermath, and the conflict between the Senate and Antony to rebuild his position in Sicily. Gathering men from across the Mediterranean, he had gradually been building his force. This force grew larger still during the proscriptions of the Triumvirate, which had forced many influential men to take refuge with him.
So I'm guessing Sextus is harboring a bunch of criminals and people that do not agree with the Triumvirate, people that may have been proscripted, people that are families or adjacent to that. Sicily is a very great place to be, just because of the agriculture that you're able to source from that. So it also creates a problem for the Triumvirate because of that agriculture possibly being blocked from being sent to the mainland.
Shortly after the formation of the Triumvirate, he had used this force to besiege the governor of Sicily, and with the help of some senators who had fled to him, forced him to surrender the province. The Triumvirs had only just begun treating him as a serious threat, Octavian sending his top general at the time, Salvidienus, to handle the matter. However, Sextus had dealt Salvidienus a minor but important victory in the Straits of Messina. Octavian had taken up the campaign himself, but upon receiving Antony's summons, immediately sailed to Brundisium, leaving Sicily and Sextus alone for the time being.
Hey, so Sextus is fine for now. We'll get back to him later.
Upon Octavian's arrival, Mercus retreated, not wanting to be trapped between the forces of Antony and Octavian. Instead, he planned to harass any ships attempting to cross the Adriatic. The Triumvirs were far more audacious than Mercus assumed, however, and with favourable winds, they made a number of quick and risky crossings without military ships, so as not to draw too much attention. Soon, Antony and Octavian had managed to move 11 legions across the Adriatic.
Marcus, what are you doing? You're sitting like a duck or a stick in the mud.
Leaving Lepidus in Rome to control the city. Mercus was furious, but nevertheless held his position, determined to at the very least prevent any supplies or munitions from reaching the Triumvirs.
This is just like parallel to what happened just a few years ago with Caesar across the Adriatic.
Nobarbus, son of the same man who had fought against Caesar, was sent with a further 50 ships to support him, giving him a total of 130. Octavian and Antony quickly sent the 8 legions who had landed in Greece earlier in the year towards Thrace under the command of Decatus and Norbanus to hold the Copilian and Sapaean passes, 2 important routes into Greece for any force crossing from Asia Minor. Meanwhile, Brutus and Cassius crossed the Aegean into Greece, landing in Cestus in August 42 BC. Thrace, at the time, was ruled by 2 brothers, Rhascupolis and Rhascus.
Yeah, and they've already, Brutus and Cassius, remember, they already kind of like got on the good side of these guys.
Brutus had previously won Rhascupolis to his side, and the Thracian king now went with 3,000 cavalry to reinforce the Liberators, while his brother Rhascus sided with the Triumvirs.
Really? So you got like a similar situation that we saw in the Second Punic War with Nubia. Not Nubia. What am I talking about? Well, with North Africa, with the 2 brothers. Can't remember the country.
Leading 3,000 cavalry to Decatus and Norbanus. The board was now set. Appian claims that Antony and Octavian had roughly 100,000 men, consisting of 19 legions, the 11 recently transported from Italy, and the 8 holding the Thracian passes.
Okay, so you got like 50-something thousand apiece now.
Well as 13,000 cavalry.
Okay.
Cassius and Brutus also had approximately 100,000, consisting of 19 legions, some of which were under strength, 20,000 allied cavalry, and 4,000 horse archers from the Parthians, Medes, and Arabs.
Whoa, Parthians keen to be involved. Interesting. Were they mercenaries?
Modern historians, however, have questioned whether such large armies could realistically be maintained logistically, and have suggested numbers closer to 60,000 on both sides.
Okay.
Whatever the true number,
it is
agreed that the Triumvirs had a slight infantry advantage and the Liberators a slight edge in the number of cavalry. Even if the more modest number of 60,000 on each side is accepted, both armies would still be colossal, larger than even the armies fielded by Caesar and Pompey at Pharsalus.
Wow.
In many ways, it was a case of history repeating itself.
That's what I said.
The Caesarians, this time under Antony and Octavian, had landed a large army in Greece, but had a precarious supply route, with their enemies controlling the sea behind them.
I mean, if you really wanted to, you do control Illyricum, right? And like, those tribes are in your debt, right? I'm pretty sure they are. So like, you have Illyricum if you have to.
Pompeians, under Cassius and Brutus, also had a large army with a secure supply line, and they could focus on trying to force a situation where they could starve their opponents into submission. The successors to the Caesarian and Pompeian party, the Triumvirs and Liberators respectively, both had amassed colossal armies.
The Triumvirs had 19 legions, and Appian claims their total is 100,000 men and 13,000 cavalry. The Liberators had 19 legions, though more under strength, and 25,000 cavalry, including horse archers. Modern historians, blah, 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 we just said all this. We literally just said all this in the previous... I think this is like a new episode, that's why.
Many of the legions on both sides had served under Caesar. Legions that Caesar had located in the east, likely including the 27th, 31st, 33rd, 36th, and 37th.
I can't remember how this goes, but I can definitely imagine defection just because we saw it prior. And yeah.
Some of whom had been made of Pompeian forces after Pharsalus, and that had later fought with Caesar at Alexandria and at the Nile.
Oh.
The Triumvirs' force, on the other hand, boasted some of Caesar's longest-serving legions, including the 6th, 7th, 8th, and Caesar's favorite, the 10th. Caesar's legions would thus...
Why was the 10th his favorite?
Once again determine the fate of the Roman Republic near a small town in the province of Macedonia called Philippi. In August 42 BC, Cassius and Brutus were the ones who held the upper hand. Their army, though smaller than the total force that the Triumvirs could muster, was roughly the same size as the one the Triumvirs had in Greece. Sextus's presence in Sicily ensured that part of the Caesarian fleet would always be pinned, giving Cassius and Brutus naval supremacy in the area.
Yeah, that doesn't matter too much here.
Moreover, the past decades of civil war had effectively drained Italy of much of its money and manpower. Cassius and Brutus, on the other hand, had plenty of both, thanks in part to their campaigns against the Lycians and Rhodians, and also because the East had suffered far less in the previous wars. Lastly, the presence of Mercus and Ahenobarbus in the Adriatic meant that the Triumvir's supply line was precarious, while Cassius and Brutus's was well secured.
I like how we said precarious versus like cut off, because like I said, Illyricum exists.
They were confident and prepared their forces for the campaign. The two began by securing the loyalties of their legions, paying them a large amount before even beginning the campaign,
Okay.
particularly to any legions that had served under Caesar.
So you're very scared of defection, I see.
Cassius made an impassioned speech to the men, justifying their war. He defended the assassination of Caesar, saying that we could no longer endure that one man should be a law in places of the laws, a sovereign in place of a sovereign people, an autocrat in place of the Senate's authority.
You see how they're still justifying the assassination here? They are so weak. They are so weak in their head. Because if you're having to justify this late in the battle, or sorry, the war, this long after Caesar's been dead, then it's just eating you alive. It is eating you alive that this is a possibility of defection. This is a possible. The writing's on the wall to me.
Next, he targeted the Triumvirs, condemning their tyrannical actions in Rome, calling them leaders of evil men who proscribe their own brothers, uncles, and guardians first.
Finally,
he addressed the men who had served under Caesar. Let it give no concern that he has been one of Caesar's soldiers. We were not his soldiers then, but our country's. The pay and the rewards given were not Caesar's, but the Republic's. For the same reason, you are not now the soldiers of Cassius or of Brutus.
Brother, why would you say that? Now, they're thinking, why would you let them think? Now they're thinking, wait, we're not the soldiers of Cassius or Brutus. He's right. He's right. Let me think individually now, and then make my own decision.
But of Rome.
Jesus.
It was an excellent speech.
Horrible speech.
With their legions' loyalties ensured, the Liberators began their march into Greece. But first, they needed to pass the legions of Decidus in the Corpilian Pass and Norbanus in the Sapaean. Cassius, in a brilliant strategic move, sent Tillius Cimber, one of the assassins of Caesar, with one legion to sail around their position, making sure he was seen doing so. Once he had landed, he made a huge show of making a number of camps. Norbanus, fearing that a large force had outflanked him, and that he was in danger of being attacked from two sides, requested Decidus to come to his position so that they could more strongly hold one position. Decidus agreed, marching quickly to Norbanus. The Liberators immediately moved through the now abandoned Corpilian Pass.
So now the bottleneck is not in the favor. Well, there might be a future bottleneck though.
Feint had worked perfectly. The Sapaean Pass was now well defended though, and would be almost impenetrable. Fortunately, Rescupolis knew this land well, and told the Triumvirs of a route around the pass. It would take 4 days over difficult terrain, but with little other option, the Liberators accepted the suggestion. Rascus, however, was also aware of this pass, spotted the maneuver, and warned Norbanus of the threat. Realizing that his position was now effectively useless, Norbanus withdrew his force in the night, marching to Amphipolis. So far, the Liberators had been remarkably successful, bypassing 2 extremely strong defensive positions without any losses.
Yeah, well, that may be, but it's very much a cat and mouse game at this point. Nothing's really happened.
Knowing that the main Triumvir force would be somewhere nearby, Cassius and Brutus prepared their force for battle near Philippi in eastern Macedonia sometime around September 42 BC. They encamped on two sets of hills, linking their two camps with a continuous wall, with an open plain in front of them, forest to their north, gorges and mountains to their rear in the east, and marsh in the south extending to the sea. To their southeast was the port town of Neapolis, which was acting as their supply base. It was an excellent defensive position.
Yeah, it looks like that. Is there a but? Is there a hole that's just obvious that I'm not seeing? We'll see.
Antony, learning of their position and eager for the fight, merged his force with the 8 legions of Norbanus and began marching to Philippi, leaving Octavian, who had been struck with illness in
He's always sick.
Damnus. He encamped on the plain, approximately 1.5 kilometers from the Liberators' position. It was an audacious move, his position not having much in terms of natural defenses. Nevertheless, he began the construction of his own fortifications, including palisades, towers, and embankments. For days, the two armies engaged in minor cavalry skirmishes with little effect. Octavian, carried on a litter, arrived at the battle, assuming command of half the army.
Dang. Man on a litter.
A close friend of Octavian's, Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa, was likely also in this half of the army, though his precise role is unclear. Determined to force an engagement, Antony marched the army out of camp. Cassius and Brutus also drew their force out of camp, but reluctant to give up the high ground, they refused to engage. They had the better defensive position, and planned to wait until Antony's supplies ran out, starving him into submission.
You guys think Antony's a little overzealous with how he positioned his men? How he was so audacious here to line up for battle in this position in the field, even in the low, not having the high ground. Kind of really, unless he's ill-informed, pretty much the same when it comes to military strength here. I don't know.
Knowing that he must force a battle soon, Antony sent a detachment of his men to discreetly construct a causeway through the marshes in order to provide a route behind Cassius's defenses. Cassius, upon seeing this, aimed to head off the causeway by extending his fortifications and building a palisade through the marshes.
What a distraction, bro.
With a significant part of Cassius's force focused on this task, Antony seized the chance to attack on the 3rd of October.
Yeah.
He mustered his legions and charged at Cassius's defenses, aiming at the point where the first wall met with this new palisade. It was an incredibly audacious attack, uphill and under missile fire. But with many of Cassius's men caught in the midst of constructing the palisade, Antony's men were able to break through the defenses.
Oh my goodness, what a move!
Storming Cassius's camp as Cassius's men tried to rally an organized defense. At the same time, on the other wing, Brutus's half of the army charged across the plain to Octavian.
But why did Brutus do this? Is it just to like keep these people at bay? Did he know how bad Cassius was at this point? It feels like they're operating in two different brains versus one.
Octavian's force drawn up in front of their camp. Brutus had not given this order, and it is unclear whether the officers under his command had seized the initiative themselves, or if his men, frustrated at seeing their allies losing, had taken it upon themselves to act. Whatever the cause, Brutus's legions overpowered the 4th Legion on Octavian's flank and turned on the rest, forcing them to retreat back into their own camp. As they did so, a general rout began, with many of Octavian's men being cut down, and Brutus's legions streaming into the camp. Octavian's tent was found empty, and Octavian would later write that he had been warned in a dream of the attack and escaped. Pliny, far more believably, claims that Octavian was carried into the marshes where he hid. Either way, Brutus's men had been hugely successful, looting the camp and claiming 3 Legion's eagles in the process.
So we have the inverse on both sides, but how do we reconcile this? Like, who won the war? I'm sorry, who won this battle? It's a tie, right?
However, Antony had been equally successful. He had repelled charges from the men working on the palisade in the marshes and completely overrun Cassius's camp, forcing Cassius to retreat to high ground. His men also looted the camp before retreating back to their position. Brutus and Antony's legions crossed the plain at the same time, but due to the distance between them and the huge amount of dust thrown up by the forces,
they didn't care.
Each assumed the other were their allies and did not engage.
Oh.
It was only when the two forces made it to their respective camps that they realized the truth. The first Battle of Philippi had ended with both sides having won and lost in different areas of the battlefield.
It's a draw.
According to Appian, the Liberators had lost around 8,000 men, the Triumvirs 16,000.
Maybe not a draw.
Cassius, on the high ground and seeing his camp overran, assumed the battle was lost. A group of Brutus's cavalry rode to his position to give him the news of their success. However, Cassius instead assumed that they were enemies.
No! I remember this. Oh, guys, this is embarrassing.
Who were coming to capture him. Not willing to risk being taken prisoner, Cassius ordered his freedman Pindarus to kill him. With his death, the Liberators' army lost one of its most experienced commanders, and
what an idiot.
Total control of the army passed to Brutus. The same day, news reached Antony that a fleet under the command of Domitius Calvinus that was transporting 2 legions and supplies across the Adriatic had been destroyed by the Liberator fleet in the area. Antony's supplies would be running out soon, and he needed to force Brutus into a decisive battle. He marched his army out of camp, hoping to tempt Brutus out from his
Does Brutus know?
defenses, but Brutus held firm. With his force now weakened from the previous battle, however, Brutus tried to consolidate his position by making his defensive perimeter shorter. In doing so, he abandoned a small hill to the south that Cassius had previously garrisoned. Antony immediately seized upon this small advantage, sending 4 legions to take and defend the hill. Over the next few weeks, more and more legions were funneled in this direction, constructing a line of defences parallel to the coast. In a similar style to one of Caesar's favourite tactics, he had seized upon this small advantage and was using it to slowly make his way into a position where
they cut him off.
He could threaten Brutus's supply line. In response, Brutus made his own fortifications opposite Antony's line. In doing so, he effectively negated his previous strategy of consolidating his position, finding his defensive line being stretched further and further. Brutus's officers, wary of their supply line and being overstretched, became more and more frustrated with him, losing faith in his command ability. They demanded that he take action and give battle, a demand to which Brutus reluctantly gave in, saying, "You have chosen to fight. You have forced me to battle when I would conquer otherwise." He drew his army out of their fortifications and prepared for battle in the classic Roman formation of triple lines, placing himself on the right wing. He also placed more legions on his right wing than in his center and left, stretching the legions on the left to prevent them being surrounded.
They are just such a bad position right now, Brutus is. I mean, it depends. It really just depends on how this initial push goes. But that line is just so wide. They're just going to get surrounded pretty quickly.
He was effectively hoping to mimic his legion's success in the previous battle by crushing one flank and then turning on the rest. Antony and Octavian eagerly also drew out their own forces in a triple axis, with Antony on the left and Octavian on the right.
I don't know how this is going to go, power versus power, really.
Their legions evenly distributed throughout. There was little maneuvering or strategy to that battle, both sides crashing into one another. With veterans on both sides, the fighting was particularly brutal. Brutus was slowly winning the fight on his wing, gradually pushing Antony's back. At the same time though, Octavian's men, outnumbering their opponents, were also
they're gonna crash.
winning, forcing Brutus's left flank to retreat step by step. Whichever flank broke first would decide the battle. In the end, it was Brutus's left, overstretched and outnumbered, that collapsed first. The first line broke, and then the second, triggering a mass rout of the entire left wing. Octavian's men pressed their advantage, some storming the camp, others falling upon Brutus's center and other wing. Brutus's men, finding themselves almost surrounded, began to break around him. Brutus was able to cut his way out with 4 legions, retreating to nearby high ground, but the battle had been decisively lost.
It's over.
Seeing his death or capture at the hands of his enemies as certain, Brutus ordered his friend Strato to kill him. We do not.
That's just so crazy though, guys. How just like that, 1 and 2 battles decides it right there, basically.
Know the number of casualties on either side, though the tough infantry-dominant fighting may mean that they were high on both sides.
I would say so.
What is known is that the entirety of the Liberator army that had survived the battle surrendered to Antony and Octavian, the legions being divided between the two. Alongside Brutus, many other influential Pompeians had also died in the battle. Marcus Cato, son of the famous rival to Caesar, died fighting heroically to buy time for Brutus to escape, and was reportedly found surrounded by many dead enemies. Antony had also made it a priority of his cavalry to chase the routing enemy, capturing or killing whichever officers and other influential men they could. Cimber, one of the assassins of Caesar, was likely one of these men killed.
Okay.
Philippi marked the end of the Liberators. Out of the main ringleaders of the conspiracy against Caesar, all were gone. Decimus Brutus had been killed by Gallic chieftains on Antony's orders.
Right.
Trebonius had been executed by Dolabella, and Cassius and Brutus were now both also dead.
So now you just got Sextus Pompey to worry about, right?
Cassius had been buried somewhere near Thassos in secret by Brutus, who had been worried that a public funeral would dishearten the men. As for Brutus, Suetonius claims that Antony beheaded his body, planning to display the grisly trophy in front of a statue to Caesar, but that it was lost in a storm crossing the Adriatic. Suetonius is somewhat known for his exaggeration and tall tales, however, and other sources say that Antony treated the body with respect, covering the body in purple, burning it in the Roman custom, and sending the ashes back to Brutus's wife.
What do you guys think happened? I'm not sure. But that's what we'll stop today. We basically saw the Battle of Philippi part 1 and part 2 in this episode. Brutus and Cassius are now dead. The Liberators in Anatolia seems like they're squashed. However, we still have Sextus Pompey. There might be something else out there, I don't know. But this is a huge step in the right direction for the Republic in terms of trying to get back to the status quo. The status quo meaning more or less, maybe less civil war, even though that has become the status quo. I'm wondering what's going on in Rome too with Lepidus. Lepidus is kind of like the guy in power right now in Rome, while Octavian and Antony are on the front lines. Will the Liberator army be welcomed with open arms back to Rome in terms of their surrender? Are they slaves? Questions. There's a lot more context to this too, so let me know if you have any more context to the Battle of Philippi. It's a very Caesarian-like win, especially with like building that palisades around and then attacking the flanks and then, just winning, of course. I appreciate you guys as always. I'll see you guys next time. Peace out. Bye-bye.